My guest this evening is a longtime friend of Eclectic Arts. He is a longtime musician who specializes in drums and percussion, among other instruments. He has a background in writing and editing for several news periodicals. He enjoys jumping out of airplanes and is the CEO of Shooting Star Skydiving Gear Superstar, located in Marietta, Georgia. And so that's Shooting Star, not SHO, it's CHU, like a parachute. Please welcome to the Eclectic Arts virtual studio, Mr. Mike Gruwell.
Hey there. How you doing, Mark?
Good. How are you, Mike?
Awesome. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Welcome to Eclectic Arts. Welcome to the Alice Tour, virtual. And I'm so excited that you could find some time in your schedule to do the interview today.
Anything for you. I was so glad to get the call from you. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So I've been asking every guest as I start off these interview segments, clearly with what's going on present day with the pandemic, you're all the way down in Georgia in Eastern Standard Time. And I'm just curious, how are you doing? How is your family holding up? What are things like in your local area in Georgia? Talk to me.
So Georgia, I'm sure we're high in the news elsewhere in the U.S. Because we didn't quite totally shut down and we opened right back up. But as far as for me and my family, we've been staying pretty much inside. My wife works remotely, so she's doing that. My kids, I have two kids that just started high school, but they're already in a school that was already doing 2 days at home and 2 days at school type thing. Okay. So they went back to full-time homeschool. And for my business, we just kept most of the people. We do a lot of shipping and receiving for skydiving gear. So I was able to stay home and work a lot from home. But we're doing fine. I'm sure everyone's kind of looking to see if Georgia makes it out alive. And right now, I'm healthy. We're healthy. A lot of people I know. I've had a couple of friends that have gone through COVID, though. But we're healthy. I can't complain about anything. Even though the business has suffered obviously, but we're healthy, so that's good.
Well, that sounds good. Just like we were talking pre-show, you start figuring out like really what's important to you during these kind of times. And if you're healthy and your family's healthy and your friends and everything else, the other things are hard to deal with. I'm not making small of that, but they will kind of fall back into place eventually. So you hang on to the important parts for sure.
Absolutely.
So I know you from high school many, many moons ago, back when I had hair and all these kind of things. But what I don't know is where you were born, where you were raised, the elementary, junior high period of your life. So if you could let everybody out there know something about your background and kind of stop at high school, because then we're going to go into a segue to college and some other things.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Berkeley, California. My dad worked for Coca-Cola, so that's kind of how we got transferred around a little bit. So I was born in Berkeley. I lived there for about 5 years. And then we actually moved to Georgia at one point when I was younger. From when I was 5 to 10, we lived in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And then right after Mount St. Helens erupted, he got transferred to Bellevue, to Seattle. And that's where I moved and started going to, is it Ben Rush? Rush Elementary?
That sounds right. Yeah,
I think that is Ben Rush, and then Rose Hill. But I lived on 149th Avenue, right down from where eventually was Microsoft. But at the time when we lived there, I lived there, it was just a field that we went and rode our bikes around. But it was right down the street. When I've gone back, because I go back every couple of years, I mean, it's just blown up. But yeah, so we moved during right after Mount St. Helens got transferred, and my dad was working at Bellevue Coca-Cola. And so that's how I ended up at Lake Washington, Rose Hill, and then Lake Washington, became a Kang. And that's how that happened. So.
Okay, that's interesting. One thing I'd like to know, because this segues right into your Mike's drum tracking. So for those of you out there watching, that's one of the main reasons why Mike is on here, because he's an incredible musician. And we're going to get to that in a minute. We actually have a video to show you too, but not yet. When did you first start getting interested in music, the drums in particular? When did all that start?
So that was junior high. So first year of junior high school, I was playing trumpet. I started trumpet in grade school or whatever, elementary school. And then That first year at Rose Hill Junior High, and I think Gary Evans was still there. I I got through halfway through, and I'm like, those guys behind the drums are having a lot more fun, and than me playing this trumpet. And I remember going and asking, hey, can I switch to drums? And ask my parents, and that was it. Midway through, I guess it's seventh grade. Yeah, it would have been seventh grade. I switched to drums. Immediately taking lessons from a guy named Dave Stetler, who was just down the street on 148, just in some music store. And I just went to town, and I never looked back. I mean, from that point on, every spare minute was playing drums. I mean, I was so driven to get better and to enjoy it. I just loved it. So it was an immediate switch. When I switched from trumpet, and I still play a little trumpet, but when I switched to drums, that was it. And I just, I never looked back. It's been awesome.
Okay, so obviously when I met you in high school, and again, for those that are watching this around the world, the high school we went to, our mascot were the kangaroos for whatever reason.
Purple kangaroos.
Yeah, if we make mention of kangaroos, purple kangaroos, that's what we're talking about. So beyond high school, what college did you go to, and were you playing in bands at that point too while you're working and going to school, or kind of what was going on around the college age?
So right out of high school, actually, I went to Dallas, Texas for a year, and I went to a college called Christ for the Nations. And I went there. I did bring my drums with me, but I was actually at that point, I thought I was becoming a youth minister. And I spent a year. It was supposed to be a 2-year college. I went the first year. I came back, and actually that summer, I was trying to earn money to go back for my second year, and I started getting into bands, and I didn't want to go back. So, long story short, I stayed in Seattle, and that's where the band started going. I was working for Washington Quarter Retirement Center there in Bellevue, and bussing tables, working. I ended up working graveyard shift, midnight to 8, and that ended up working great for playing in bands and stuff like that. So I met a couple other Kangs, if you want to, and that's most of my bands were people that were from Lake Washington High School. And we started playing clubs and stuff like that, putting out cassette tape demos. You know how it was at those, so that was from like 90 till about 97 was full-time band and working in a couple different bands. So, and everything I put in was all original bands. I never got into cover bands, or I never got into, just recording for other people. I was like, I threw all my eggs into wanting to be in an original band. And so that's what I did for about 7 years.
Okay, wow. It's like we were talking pre-show. It's always fascinating when you kind of think you know a lot of things about somebody, and then you kind of find out you actually don't know that much about them. And so that period of time, for people out there that are watching this, how would you describe your drum style at that point? Not now, currently, but back then.
Like full on, like energy, just hitting as hard as I can, and just going for broke. The bands I was in was a band called Stone Dresden, and then Black Moses, 420 Love, Mushmouth, but all of it was like funk, rock, heavy. It was heavy rock, funk type stuff, but basically just energetic. Yeah. So, but I definitely love drums and wanted to get better at it, but I also just love being with 4 other guys making something original. So I didn't feel like I had to be the best player, but I felt like we had to be just a band that sounded good and we're just having a good time, and just hoping things would work out or just keep going. But slowly after time, one person would get burnt out or something like that. So nothing ever like took off for whatever reason.
Okay, well, yeah, and we all know that all the musicians watching this, and everyone that's ever been in a band understands that's very much like a marriage, and people's priorities changes, and people move, and people get burnt, like you just said, people get burnt out, and things just kind of fade away that way. Let's kind of segue into what you're doing currently with Mike's Drum Tracking. So, where did this idea come from, and what kind of services do you offer?
So, fast forward, about 97, I moved back to Georgia. And I did some bands in Atlanta for about a year or two. And then finally the drums kind of went into the closet, unfortunately. But about 5 years ago, me and my wife ended up at a local church and they needed a drummer. And all of a sudden those drums came out and it got me thinking about playing again. And I auditioned for the church. I started playing. And first I was like living off those skills from, the 90s, the 80s and 90s. I was just playing at church and I kind of living off those skills for the next couple of years. But then all of a sudden, it was actually a podcast, Modern Drummer podcast. And it was a guy that's like the editor, a journalism guy for Modern Drummer. And it kind of like started sparking me to really want to like dive deep into it. And what could I do now? Like, I don't, with a family and stuff, it's hard to even think about being in an original band again, or at least it was like a year ago or 2 years ago. Like, how would I do that and be able to make that all happen? But I started listening and thinking like, hey, I could start doing just drum tracks from home and build out the studio and stuff like that. So that's where it started from. Like, what could I do at home and still do my business, still be with my family, but not have to travel or go to band practice or that type of stuff and just do it at home as I had time. So that's what I started getting into. But that was the idea. Something I could do and still kind of the rest of my life wouldn't be affected. Since that time, I've hooked up with a couple guys and we've talked about original bands again remotely. But, my original idea is basically people that play guitar, play bass, sing. They're trying to put out their own singles, but they need a drummer and they just need someone to lay down those tracks. So that's what I've been doing, developing my studio, getting the mics, everything set up, learning how to track my drums, save all that, and then send it off to them and they can use that to, make their music. So.
Okay. All right, cool. So I have more questions about your business with Mike's Drum Tracking. For the folks down back at headquarters, this would be a great time. We have a video to show of you jamming with yourself. So if we could show that video, that would be awesome. And then we'll come back to Mike Gruwell. So, Mike, that's awesome seeing you jam with yourself. And
so in addition to like tracking for other people, I set up this recording studio in my basement, and now it's like, well, I can lay down my own bass track, and now I'm just like stuff's flowing out of me just for fun of it. So when I'm not doing stuff for other people, I'm making my own, who knows where that will go. But so I'm having fun. I've got all these instruments. My son plays bass. My other son plays saxophone. So sometimes I steal riffs or stuff that they've come up with, or I have them come jam with me. So now I'm just like, one man band sometimes down in the basement.
Oh, that's awesome. For some of the gearheads out there, in that particular video, what kind of kit are you playing? What were some of the cymbals because some of the cymbals are really interesting to me. What are some things you can talk about with that kit?
So that's a DW custom kit. That was kind of my treat to myself. I had an old Rogers kit that I played that I bought with paper route money in 19, whatever it was, 80 something. But that lasted me through all my bands all the way until I started playing for this church. And I started playing that drum set again, and it just fell apart. But so I bought that DW kit. So that's a DW custom kit. It's huge. It's got a 24-inch bass drum, and then a 18-inch floor tom, 12-inch rack tom. Sabian cymbals. Lately, I've been doing some Sabian AAX, which are my crash and my hi-hat. It's just a real clean sound. And then the rest are some older Zildjians on that set. And then there's a cowbell on there that I started playing. But yeah, and then there's djembe that I'm playing, and then a bass for my son. But the big thing is that's a big DW kit. I love that huge bass drum, that 24-inch bass drum. So.
Yeah, no, it sounded good to me, and obviously, I think there's going to be a lot of people that could utilize your skill set like you said, for their projects. I know personally that I've got a lot of contacts with musicians that are doing everything artificially because maybe they're a singer and they don't have anything behind them. And if they want to get something acoustic like what you do, then you're the guy to call and get a hold of. So.
And that's what I'll get is just, some sort of track that already has some electronic drums behind it, but they want that live acoustic feel. And some, ideas to go with it. And that's where I can help out and provide those tracks. So.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Well, I want to kind of shift gears. We got about 10 minutes left here or so. And as I told you pre-show, for me, being a writer first and a photographer second and all these kind of things, I was really kind of dumbfounded to find out that you have a writing background, a journalism background, an copy editing background. Where did this come from, and what can you tell me about your experiences working and writing for papers?
So it's pretty much everything except for drums, which I feel like was my true calling. I just kind of fell into. So for journalism, I ended up going to Bellevue Community College after I got back from Dallas, Texas, and I wanted to get some sort of just keep the schooling going, what have you. So I went there. And I was basically randomly picking classes. So there could be history of Africa, psychology and journalism. And how does that all work together? So, so I started going to classes. I ended up in this journalism class. And all of a sudden, halfway through the class, I'm really getting into it. They're actually giving us stories to write for the newspaper. And all of a sudden, the newspaper staff starts to dwindle. And they ask, hey, can you start working for the newspaper? And then all of a sudden, can you be the editor of the newspaper? And by the time that class is over, I was editor for the Advocate, which was the Bellevue BCC newspaper. It was a weekly newspaper at the time. And so, yeah, I just fell into it and I just loved it. And from there on out, it was kind of, I was working at Washington Court Retirement Center. I also worked for Coca-Cola for a while, but I started working for newspapers. And it was for free to start off with, just little weeklies in Kirkland and Redmond and all those little, at that time, there was all these little, weekly or monthly newspapers. And then I started wanting to get jobs at a daily newspaper and stuff like that. Anyway, that's when I moved to Georgia. I was getting into skydiving and I started working for a newspaper, just reporting on high schools and the news and, what have you. But I really fell in love with writing. And now it's everything that I do. So for my skydiving business, I have a blog and I write all kinds of education articles. And now with Mike's Drum Tracking, I started a blog and I'm writing about different cymbal sounds and stuff like that. So journalism definitely is not leaving me. That's, but that's something I fell into. I didn't go seeking it. I just kind of fell into it.
It's really interesting how that whole kind of 6 degrees of separation and things in your background that might, come into play 20 years later.
Oh, yeah.
It's happened for me. Obviously, it just happened for you. And I'm sure for a lot of other folks out there, it's been the exact same thing. It's you just never know where something from your background will start helping you out down the road.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And, and for me, I want to get to this other part before we run out of time. I don't really like heights. certain things, like if I went to the top of the Space Needle to go look at the city of Seattle, I'm fine with that. But
Yeah.
if you want to go across like some sort of, I don't know, some sort of bridge in the middle of the forest, I'm not doing it. If you want me to climb a rock, I'm not doing that either. But you like and love to jump out of airplanes. You are the CEO of Shooting Star Skydiving Gear Superstore. So where did this whole interest come from? And what can you tell me about from that beginning to where you are now as a CEO?
So again, another thing I just fell into, my sister wanted to go skydiving for one of our birthdays. And this was actually right around the Olympics in Georgia. But so I went to visit my sister in Georgia, and she wanted to do this tandem skydive. I had no clue what all that was about or what have you. We went out there, we made a jump, and I was like, that's cool, I'm done. She's like, I'm going to do student training. I'm like, what? Anyway, long story short, I stayed in skydiving to basically do something with my sister. I did not enjoy it to begin with. I can tell you, I was scared of height, just like you. And it took me a good 100 jumps to like really fall in love with the sport. But basically, I was doing it just to spend time with her. And then after that, I fell into it. It was a way that I started packing parachutes and getting to know the gear, writing articles for the skydiving magazines, stuff like that. So I just kind of fell into it. I ended up becoming a parachute rigger. And that's where you're packing the reserve parachutes and you're sewing on parachutes, all this stuff I started learning. And I immediately started making money doing it. And then I started selling the gear. And that's what Shooting Star is. We sell the gear to skydivers. And then I write articles and stuff about it. But again, it's just something I fell into. And I don't have a business degree. All I knew is I knew how stuff that I liked and what other people liked and recommended. And I was able to start selling that to people. So now that's like my full-time job. And we have like 6 or 7 people that are working for us. And I've been doing that since basically 99 when I got married, my wife, I was into journalism. I was working in a newspaper, right? I was just starting to make money skydiving and I was still playing in bands. And my wife's like, pick one, and one of them is money. And so I picked skydiving and kind of the journalism per se, and the drums went away for a little bit, and I just pursued that, and I just did everything I could to make a living at it. So,
wow, that's amazing. I know something that I've been asking other guests, and I actually don't even have it here in my notes, but based on what you just said, what kind of what kind of tips would you give some young person, some 20-something out there that is kind of in the same boat where they've got different interests and there's something where they would like to perhaps make it into an actual business? And like you said, you don't have a business degree, so I'm sure you probably had some starts and stops and fumbles and things of that nature. But what kind of like basic tips would you give somebody that wants to kind of do what you do?
I'd say just all in. I mean, I feel like I could have done this, with journalism or with drums, but it's just like making that choice and just all in and being open to all possibilities. Like I look back on drumming, like if I wouldn't have just put all my eggs in one basket for like original bands and said, "Oh, I could track, I could write music, I could write for music periodicals and stuff like that," like being open to everything. Instead of putting all your eggs in one basket. And that's what I did with skydiving. Like I started packing parachutes, became a parachute rigger, became an instructor. And then 6,000 jumps later, I'm owning my own business, one of the largest businesses in skydiving. And, but it's just that I put all my effort into it. Like, and I wasn't afraid to like go down different avenues. I'll write, I'll sell, I'll pack, I'll service, I'll do whatever in this industry. And I would say that's for any industry, journalism, like with Eclectic Arts or all that, music, but just giving everything you got and just pursuing all avenues within that industry.
Wow, that's really inspiring. I think it goes right along with the band Alice, because they're great do-it-yourself. The beautiful video and audio things that they're doing on this tour, that's coming from the band. They didn't hire somebody to do that; they're doing it, and it goes right along with what you said about how you developed your own business. You jumped all the way in 100% to every avenue of it, to learn it, to build it, to make it your own. It's really kind of like the American dream, really, when you think about it. That's awesome. So, I mean, you've got, besides Mike's drum tracking, and we just mentioned your skydiving business, and we've talked about you have family, you've got twin boys that are in high school. How do you balance where's the work-life balance come in, because you have so many things going on? It's something that everybody, is always trying to do. How's it for you?
I'm very blessed to have a wife that fills in all the gaps and more. There's no way that I could do everything I'm doing without having her. So, I can't imagine doing it, and having that support and love, with the kids and stuff. I mean, they're trying and all that stuff, high schoolers and stuff like that. But, it's having it's that whole, family thing. But definitely, that's been a big thing, is just having that partner, whoever it is, a partner, someone that's there to back you up, and to help fill in those gaps and even more. So that's how it's worked out for me.
Awesome. It's been just an amazing 28, 29 minutes here of talking and catching up with you and letting everybody out there know about Mike's drum tracking. You can follow him on all of the social media platforms. You can see his videos. You can hit him up and have him involved with your project. If you want to jump out of an airplane, I'm sure he can probably help you with that.
Sure.
If you're ever down in the Georgia area and you have that inkling, then hit up Mike and go visit his store. And again, Mike, it's been just a pleasure reconnecting with you and talking about everything here. Don't be a stranger. And I'm going to, at this point, turn it over to the Alice folks who are getting ready for their first set of the night. And everyone, don't go anywhere. So thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Mark.
See ya.
See ya.